Well, it is Easter morning, and our talk this morning is called Awakening to the Christ Within. All that love that we just meditated on, that Christ within.
Well, let's start out with a definition. What do we mean by the Christ within? In fact, what is the Christ? Ernest Holmes says, the Christ is a universal idea, and as each of us puts on the Christ, we surrender our limited sense of life and realize our divine wholeness and unity with good, spirit, and God. The ascension of Jesus as spirit symbolizes his divine nature transcending physical form. The universal energy, the core of his and our, by the way, being, was our true nature before we adopted this human form, and will continue on as our physical form disintegrates and passes back into formless substance from which it came. It's an eternal, cyclical process, like our symbol describes. The format of the Easter story dates back centuries before Christianity. The names Esther, Ostra, and Ishtar are influences of the name Easter that the Christian church celebrates. Resurrection stories predate Jesus, featuring heavily in ancient Egyptian, Sumerian, Canaanite, and many other traditions, with dying and resurrection of semi-gods and mythical characters. Back in 1600 BC, we start out with Osiris, the Egyptian god. 2300s, there was, in the Sumerian tradition, Inanna and Ishtar. And also in 2300, in Canaan was the god Baal. And in Greco-Roman tradition, there was Adonis. And in the Greek tradition, in 1350 BC, was Dionysus. And then the Norse god Odin in 800 BC. And the Roman Mithras in 100 BC. All of them, by the way, died and were resurrected. Mithra was the most recent to Jesus, and his birth date and death circumstances are all taken after the story of Mithras. Notice the wide range of geological areas and spiritual traditions of which the same thing happened. Also notice that they are all pagan deities. And Easter is the only Christian holiday influenced by the phases of the moon. I thought that was pretty fascinating. I believe there's no coincidence there. This suggests that the circulatory aspect of life and death in nature is congruent and reflected in Christian doctrine. Maybe the natural concept of eternal life is more universally fundamental than it is Christian fundamentalism. Now, the fundamental Christian holiday, or the High Holy Day of Easter, is a celebration of a superhuman event where a human being rose from the dead and took on spiritual essence. As seen from this theological perspective, it shows Jesus accomplishing things that we mere mortals are incapable of experiencing. Under this fundamental assumption, we are to honor Jesus and his superhuman ability and recognize his superiority over us, and the stories of his miraculous accomplishments affirm his apparent station of being above and beyond and greater than ours. However, this is the opposite of the actual teachings of Jesus, and the opposite of our understanding according to what he said. He lived a humble life and taught that everything he could do, we could do as well, and his life was a demonstration of how to do that. There's no miracle or unnatural character in his life or his transition. It's just a metaphor for our higher truth. The fact that we are spiritual beings and will continue on as spiritual beings when we leave this mortal plane. The word mortal, by the way, literally means subject to time and space limitation. In fact, it comes from the Latin word for death, having a beginning and having an end. So this mortal experience we have has a beginning at our birth and has an end at our death. But the true nature of who we are does not have a beginning and an end. It continues on. So Easter, the Easter story, is actually quite simple. It's a reminder that physical death is not the end of our being. We are immortal, infinite beings currently going through a human life experience within time and space. The death of our humanity is not our end. It's a transition. Death is simply a release of all limitation that we are experiencing in human form. A human life experience of Jesus is a metaphor for our human life experience. If we were meant to see him as God, above and beyond our capabilities, there would be no correlation or purpose or point in him being born as human. If his death and resurrection were meant to be taken literally as proof of his lofty station above and beyond us, there was no point or purpose in giving him human characteristics throughout his entire life. If Jesus were not like us or representative of us, there's no causal relationship between us, and there would be no incentive for us to emulate his lifestyle. Out of curiosity, I went to Google this week and I searched metaphysical Easter symbols to come up with some metaphysical ideas. And the first thing that showed up, of course, is an AI quote. And I promised you a long time ago that I would never print out an IA message and speak it, but I'm going to read this quote. It says, metaphysically, Easter symbolizes the resurrection of inner Christ consciousness, representing spiritual rebirth, the triumph of light over darkness, and the awakening from material limitation to divine awareness. It is not merely a historical event, but an ongoing internal process of letting go of old, limited identities, which is crucifixion, to rise into a new, elevated state of being. Now I read that and I thought, wow, that's pretty good. But then I read it again and I realized, well, you know, that's a pretty good metaphysical definition from predominantly Christian point of view. So I decided to clear it up a little bit. And I would say that according to true metaphysics, it's not a resurrection or rebirth because there is no death to be reborn from. The resurrection is a remembering of our divine essence. It's a resurgence of our divine truth within us. It's not a new elevated state of being, it's simply a recognition of our divine truth. It's a realization of who and what we are. There is no new elevated state of being because we are already there. But we may need a shift of conscious awareness to realize that we are there and to realize our truth. The resurrection is a recommitment of our I amness. There is no time in God, so there is no relevance to what we were or what we will be. And that matters, all that matters, is who and what we are in the here and now. Our I amness is living in the eternal present, living in the present now, the eternal now. The only crucifixion or dying away that we experience is our release of belief in limitation. The only awakening is our awareness of our truth, of who we are.
I like that, and I really like hearing about the many different stories and myths that have been shared throughout the years, and coming to the point of where we can each think individually for ourselves what something means to us and for us. So, some time back, I found this quote from Ernest Holmes, and he wrote, "Never limit your view of life by any past experience." And I've had that quote on my radar for quite some time, and I thought, well, I've been reading it regularly, and I've been thinking, well, well, I'll use it in a talk when the time is right. Well, the time is right. The time is right because part of that transformation David was talking about has taken place within me. You know, we're constantly growing. And what I realized is that this quote, I was taking it more, reading it like this: never limit my view of life by any of my past personal experiences. That isn't really what he wrote, but that's how I was taking it. And that's good, because that idea has shifted me so many times. But I have a new idea, and it works around that little word any, A-N-Y, any and all experiences. So I had been reading it in a way that worked for me at the time, but that limited my view with the only my personal past. And the any means that it includes all dogma, all traditions that are set forth by any and all societal entities. That is really life transforming. So, to me, awakening that Christ within us is an ongoing journey of our humanity. It is an invitation to celebrate joyfully, to truly let go of limiting beliefs and grab hold of life with new eyes, which means new thoughts. Part of the letting go, so we can actually enjoy the celebration of life and all it holds for us, could include the practice called kenosis. A fellow minister shared that she was using this idea of kenosis. Kenosis is a Greek word from an early Christian spiritual view of mystical theology, and it means self-emptying. In practice, it is the sacred art of releasing what no longer serves. Ideas such as old identities, habits, beliefs, and fears. And we do this, we release in order to make room for divine life to flow anew. It's not about a loss, it's about a preparation. It's not about being weak, but trusting the process, trusting the God of your beliefs. By emptying ourselves of the past, we then become available to renewal, freedom, and wholeness. So as I was contemplating what awakening to the Christ within means for me, means to us, and understanding it's a simple and yet complex awakening to the truth of who we are. Who am I? Who are you? The divine expressing uniquely as you. That is the truth of who you are. You are the divine expressing uniquely as you. What happens is we shift our thoughts to the way that we express when we know this truth. And so we can ask ourselves, as I did, I entered into meditation and I asked myself, what do I want to experience? Within the question, I always add for myself that I am not going to die from this human experience with anything left on the table. No regrets, live life to the fullest. So if I'm going to claim that, what does that look like for me? What does that mean for me? Well, I'll tell you what I did in a minute, but first I'm going to tell you a quote from our founder, Ernest Holmes. Magnificent quote. The mind is a magnet. and we attract that with which we identify the self. In order to get the most out of life, we must learn consciously to change many of our habitual thought patterns. This is not easy at times, for our old thought patterns cling to us with great tenacity. But being thought patterns, they can be reversed. So I decided to do a meditation on the idea of what I want to experience, keeping Ernest Holmes' words in mind. I wanted to come up with an example that I could use that would be way outside the box, at least for me. Some of you might think, oh, I thought that 50 years ago. Okay, good for you. Way outside the box for me, because I invite all of us to do that. And I entered into the meditative state and posed the question, what do I want to experience? Well, thought patterns do change, so stay with me here. The question that popped into my eyes, into my mind, and had me opening my eyes to go search on Google if this was even true, was this. If I lived on the moon, would Earth appear to go through phases just as we see the moon do? Now, before I Googled it, I thought, I'm going to guess my answer is yes. But what would that look like? And why did this come up in meditation for me? How's this going to work into any kind of a talk? Okay, well, just follow through. So the answer absolutely is yes. If you were to live on the moon, and I did mentally live on the moon, as you observe the Earth, it would appear to go through phases, just like the moon does for us. It would go through the cycle of phases that several people here have talked about today, except that they would be exactly opposite of what we see from Earth's moon phases. For example, during new moon on Earth, new moon on the moon, new moon Earth would be full.
New Earth.
When they have new moon. So it would be exactly opposite from what we're used to seeing. Now the pictures that they have of it are absolutely beautiful. They're breathtaking. But like me, you might be thinking, what on earth does this have to do with life? So I sat with that question. And it directed me right back to Ernest Holmes' words. I am all about nature, the nature of life. And not just the nature of the animals and the plants and the moon phases, but the nature of divine humanity, our own inborn spirituality. And so my mind is like a magnet that is attracting, in meditation too, that which I identify as myself. And I will get the most out of life as I learn to consciously change habitual thought patterns. Who would have thought that in meditation I could pose that question and come up with the idea of living on the moon? Oh, what would that be like? And where it would lead. It's not always easy, but since they are thought patterns, they can be reversed. And as they are, they deepen within us. Who knew that simply opening up to changing habitual thought patterns could induce a meditation that took me to the moon and had me deepening my inner conviction of the nature within me? So what awakens you? How can you step out of those habitual thought patterns? Awakening to the Christ nature, looks different. Not is different, but looks different for each one of us. Don't be afraid to be as a child. Don't be afraid to eat chocolate eggs or wear bunny ears. Don't be afraid to accept Easter eggs that have affirmations that are meant just for you. And don't be afraid to
fly me to the moon and let me live among the stars. Let me know what life is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, take my hand. In other words, say you love me.
And I do love you, and I appreciate you singing that for us. So whether you go to the moon in your meditations, or Jupiter or Mars, or eating a chocolate Easter egg, remember it's a celebration as we awaken to that spirit that is within us. We awaken the joy, the childlike nature that we are. Holmes tells us, stop trying, stop struggling, begin to be calm, to trust in the higher laws of life. Even though you do not see them, they are still there. So awaken and don't leave anything on the table.